Well, it's the same table. But again, you can see that we got inferior work and we overpaid. I
Yeah.
mean, they also took over some debt for the airport authority, which ostensibly was to spruce up the VC Birdie Airport for Cricket World Cup. It seemed as though that ABI Bank had actually had extended the money. But if you look at the borrowings of the UPP during the period, you would notice that they had borrowed. You should have that. You should have a spreadsheet somewhere there in which the UPP would have borrowed about 2 point something billion during the 10-year period. And one of the debts that they actually accounted for at the time was a debt of $60 million that was due to ABI Bank, which they said was to spruce up the airport. But I noticed that the amounts quoted in that document are significantly more than the 60 million. So there are all sorts of discrepancies here. I'll try and get that document to you with the borrowings. So at that point, the national debt as of November 12, 2010 was about $3.6 billion. And the UPP would have borrowed $1.8 billion. And just to give our listeners an idea as to what those borrowings were, they had borrowed $151 million on the Eastern Caribbean Stock Exchange. From ACB, they would have borrowed a total of $104 million. So, for example, on one occasion, they had to borrow $2 million to cover payroll costs. They borrowed $8.5 million to do roads in Barbuda, $52 million to finance capital projects, $23 million to the Transport Board headquarters. That turned out to be, in fact, there was another 8 given, so a total of $31 million. That did not complete the Transport Board, and because they had significant cost overruns. Then ABI Bank, they had $5.4 million for budgetary support. Then they borrowed $13.5 million for back pay. $14 million in bonds, $60 million at the Cricket World Cup, $1.6 million to fund electoral commission work, $4.1 million to purchase land on High Street for APUA, $8.8 million to upgrade APUA PCS, $2 million for APUA Internet. Caribbean Union Bank too, they borrowed $1.5 million to relocate the UK High Commission. Now, here's a situation in which the UK High Commission was renting office at Thayer Street for a very small sum. And they went and rented more expensive properties. And they're saying that the relocation costs for a very modest office was $1.5 million. Then they have here $13.5 million that they invested in LIAT, $22 million financed the fiscal deficit for April 2008, $40 million support improvement, $11.5 million to purchase the Food City building. That was not the total amount. They had come up with $4 million in cash, so they paid $15.5 million for the Food City building. Then I see another $44 million here invested in LIAT, that's Caribbean Development Bank, $14.5 million LIAT again, Caribbean Development Bank, $5.7 million, a total of $64.6 million that they borrowed from CDB for LIAT. And then the China Exim Bank, they had to borrow $22 million to finish Mount St. John, $108 million for the new power plant. That turned out to be more like $150 million because they had to buy additional transformers and so on. And as you know, that with that power plant, that was a loss investment. And when we speak about corruption, you will see how they wasted our money. Then you remember the Motorola, the van that they had there with the surveillance van. They paid nearly $5 million for that. They borrowed to do that. I think they got the credit from Motorola. In fact, it's more like $6 million that they paid. Let me see, $6 or $6.5 million for that police communication system.
Yes.
Then you have external creditors, another $24 million. Venezuela, they got $135 million for budgetary support. You remember when former Prime Minister Spencer said he got a call? Right.
Yes.
That's $135 million they get right there. We still have to pay back that. That loan has not been repaid as yet. Then they got another $106 million from Petrocaribbean. In fact, that since increased to the unsecured portion of the Petrocaribbean deal increased to $250 million, which we had to beg the Venezuelan government to write off. Then Banco Desarrollo from Venezuela for the housing project at North Sound. They borrowed $27 million and they only built maybe about 10 homes. We're the ones who had to complete that project when we got in. Then you had Global Bank of Commerce. They borrowed $7.3 million to pay arrears on the CDB loan. Antigua Overseas Bank, they borrowed $80 million for airport upgrade. Now, you see the kind of double counting and so on taking place here. So if they borrowed back then $86 million and Andre Guterres come back and get 58, there's some serious issues here.
Indeed.
You know?
Indeed.
Then they also borrowed $6.2 million from Antigua Overseas Bank to purchase a property in New York for the New York mission. They were running bank overdrafts of about $75 million at the time. There's also an increase in supplier credit of $95 million owed to contractors. That was not the full amount. The full amount was more like about $400 million. But at the time, the increase is what I captured, $95 million. Then they owed WEOC and APC $65 million in trade payables. That subsequently increased to about $81 million for WEOC and $40 for APC. So eventually that was $120 million that they owed between APOA and APC. And if we were to include SEMCORP, they owed SEMCORP $22 million as well. So for basic services, the provision of water, electricity, and fuel, they owed $140 million and could not pay. And both SEMCORP and West Indies Oil at the time were threatening to discontinue the supply of water and fuel.
Yes.
I mean, they had their issues with them too, and they never really threatened them with any disruption of the service, but they were carrying a receivable of $40 million, which we eventually practically paid off, and we reduced it to about maybe about 17, 18 million, and then we wrapped it into the settlement of the APC debt. Remember, the Haddies got a judgment against them for $222 million. We had to go and settle that for about $40 million. So the total borrowings, and at the time too, they had $80 million in undrawn commitments from CDB. They had an IMF loan of $320 million. We eventually had to pay off that. Then they owed the Clico Investment Bank as well, associated with Sunshine Hub, at least about $5 million, where they charged a small parcel of land opposite the cancer center. That still has not been paid. They also had the Half Moon Bay acquisition, in which about, I'd say, $130 million was owed. We subsequently cut that by more than half. And total liabilities, $1.8 billion. And you know what that funded?
What's that?
So let me tell you, man, let me get the projects them.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the kind of wastage that took place under the UPP. So with that Lee power plant, we lost $150 million on that. The repair from the airport there with Andre Guterres, that was about $135 million minimum, at least $50 million US dollars wasted there. HMB, they kept the property for over 10 years, accruing a significant amount of interest. We lost at least $67 million there. Roads, they claim that they spent $1.2 billion. We know that we didn't get 1/3 the value. So you're looking at least another $600-700 million in monies literally stolen from the people of Antigua and Barbuda. But that Lee power plant, as I said before, $150 million. Bow Panel, you remember when they gave Bow Panel about 300 acres of land?
Yes.
You're talking about $60 million. We had to claw back that. We had to end those agreements and take back the people land. Eventually we gave them 5 acres of crabs to do a factory. And we said to them, if they the project is successful, we will make small portions of land available to them. Valley Church Beach, they gave it to a man named Willie Bermello, something like that, or Bermello, for $1. And the man never built anything after 10 years. We had to pay the man $1 million US to get back the land.
He had, and I think he had absolute title. Am I correct?
You understand? The man had the title, the man didn't pay nothing, and they gave title to the man for $1.
Wow.
On a promise that he will invest, that he will build a hotel. The man never built anything.
Nothing.
And he never had any intention to build anything. In fact, at one point, he was trying to sell the land to Sunwing. We had to block it. We had to tell him anytime at all he sells the land that, that we will not issue any non-citizen landholding license. He wanted $2 million on one occasion. It was reported by our High Commissioner in Miami. Not High Commissioner, our ambassador in Miami, Ambassador Gilbert Bastani, that a certain minister of the UPP and I'm not going to call the name because I don't want us to sue us. He had insisted that the settlement should be $2 million so that he could get $1 million. So to tell you how corrupt these people are, you don't want to talk about corruption. Fort James, they sold 15 acres of land for a net of about 3.5 acres. 3.5 million, because there was an overpayment of 1.5 million based on the treasury analysis. That land is worth 20 million US, so we lost at least $50 million there. And I'm gonna call the person's name because you know.
I know who you're talking, but please don't. Yes.
No, you won't.
Yeah.
Then Pfizer State, you remember they gave them back $15 million on some land.
Yes.
On a transaction that took place about 30 years prior. And they did some bubble there. Then they gave Digicel and Cable and Wireless a whole heap of tax waivers. In fact, it was estimated that we could have lost $100 million there, in that the deal was lopsided. All they got was some computers and some little internet rooms from Digicel, container rooms that they put in the schools them. But it was a set-off against the waiver of taxes. Then you had the Food City deal, the Bencorp deal, in which they bought those properties at an overvalue. We know what happened with the Adams and the state insurance buildings. We'd have lost tens of millions of dollars in those two projects. And even the roads around the stadium, they spent $77 million on those secondary roads that ordinarily that would have cost maybe about $10 million. So we lost over $60 million there. And when we questioned them, remember at one point we had to picket them and so on. They say how they had to dig 20 feet down to the ground because the ground was soft, and then they had to fill it with material, and that is why the cost per mile was in excess of $10 million. Everything for them was a steal. I mean, these guys have plundered this country so badly. Yeah? Those of you who want to say you're agitating for UPP and Harold Level, you go ahead and see what happened to you. And I'm going to tell you how crap are going to smoke your pipe. But these people have a history of incompetence and corruption. Over $1.4 billion of thiefness that I just went to just now. $1.4 billion. Now, hear what they're accusing us of, and people must be able to make a comparison. They say, for example, that my son bought a parcel of land. He did a swap, did a quick flip, bought a piece of land for $2 million and then flip it for $4 million. He bought it from a private person, one private person, and sold it to another private person, and they claim corruption. Then there's another deal in which COVID had some land at Judge Bay. We did a swap or an exchange for them for about 4.5 acres of land at Judge Bay to do the housing project with lands at Frieshill. And they got some additional land in which they paid $1 million in cash. Plus, there was also 2 properties involved as well, in which COVID were utilizing the two. Not COVID, National Housing was utilizing the 2 properties owned by COVID for an office. So that's properly documented, and the land that they got at Frieshill in exchange, they would have paid about $5 per square foot when the commercial price or the development price there is $3 per square foot. So that was more than a fair exchange. The people of Antigua and Barbuda did not lose anything. But again, because, I have family members or associates who were involved with it, Harold Lovell tried to spin it and to suggest that it was a ripoff. Nothing was lost there. Then they spoke about Osbert Frederick, that he got a payment of near to $100,000 from the CIP unit, from the funds of the CIP unit.
Yes.
It was 2 years of pay in which he was working and did not get paid. And then they also tried to suggest that the $100,000 that we gave the community group in St. Mary's South, that was corruption, when what we did was to partner with a community group that raised a few $100,000 to do a fire outpost. We only put in a small amount, $100,000, which has served the people of the South very well. The minister at the time made the case that, when we were in opposition, that a number of homes were burnt flat to the ground. In fact, on one occasion, there's some, 2 youngsters got burnt up in a house there as well. So she took a decision that we needed a fire outpost in the area, and we partnered with a community group. In fact, presently we're partnering with a group known as Jennings Connection. They're sending some fire equipment here, and we're making probably about maybe $18,000 to $20,000 available so that we can clear the goods and make them available to the fire service. So this is nothing new. They accuse Sir Robin of corruption with Barbuda Airways. We bought this plane for just over $300,000 US, and it is presently being repaired by the Antigua and Barbuda Defense Force to be utilized as part of its equipment to do circumnavigations and to transport people to Barbuda and so on. The truth is, we were partnering with Caribbean helicopters, but they went belly up. They went bankrupted. They became bankrupted. So that's the reason why that project did not advance. But we still own the plane. Again, there's no corruption. This is something that was declared to the people of Antigua and Barbuda. They also said that my farm, investment in the farm, is corruption. Now, I have not benefited from any government support. I have not taken anything from the people. So I don't know. I mean, you can see that they're stretching. But notwithstanding their stretches, you can... And I don't even want to speak about what they did with sandals and so on, because, that's a closed issue.
That's
but let us
not
forget that the two biggest scandals in the history of this country happened under the UPP regime. Let me repeat. The two largest scandals in the history of this country happened under the UPP regime. And I'm not even referring to Stanford, because Stanford came over from the previous Labour Party administration. But the two largest ones are the situation there with John Ash. Let us not forget.
Yes.
John Ash UN saga, in which several individuals served jail time. And it is our benevolence that probably saved Prime Minister Spencer and even, what's his name there? And I'm going to call the names because it's true, and I line. Wayne Mansour. From probably further action by U.S. law enforcement, because they had access to waive the immunity, and we refused to do it on the principle that, we should not have to to waive immunity in order to incriminate any of our citizens. And then you had the Odebrecht scandal, in which billions of dollars were laundered through AOB and Minor Bank. And the laundering took place under the UPP's administration. So if they want to talk about corruption, let's talk corruption. At the end of the day, they can't provide a scintilla of evidence of any corruption involving me, because one of the things I did early and bright was to make sure that any form of government contracting or procurement, that the Prime Minister cannot be involved in it. Even just recently, when some publication in Barbados made some spurious claim about corruption involving the present road contract that is funded by CDB. I was able to tell him, ask him, why are you calling me? I don't do contracts. I don't do procurement. Go to the minister who deals with it. But it turns out that it is a totally frivolous, statement or letter of request calling for an investigation with some consultant who was replaced by a local Antiguan. And he's trying to make a big issue about corruption, but there's no such evidence of any corruption. And, the claim is frivolous. So if it's one thing that my administration values is the issue of good governance. We believe that good governance is good business. And one of the reasons why I can come on this radio station any day, or any radio station, any media entity anywhere in Antigua and Barbuda, anywhere in the world,
anytime,
is because stick me up with any issue of corruption. I've kept my hands clean, and they will continue to be clean, because at the end of the day, I'm not looking for public money. I'm too skilled at creating legitimate wealth to go and touch government money or to do anything that is unethical or illegal. So tell them I say to wheel and come again. When they talk about corruption, I will go as far as saying that my administration is the best in, perhaps easily, the best administration when it comes to integrity that ever governed this country. And I say that without fear of contradiction.
And I agree with you, sir, wholeheartedly. I agree with you. We have gotten some reactions so far. One person here on Facebook says, Mr. Prime Minister, the United Progressive Party got the nerves questioning your administration spending when they were throwing money into rabbit holes. Another one said, Lord of mercy. Somebody says here from the WhatsApp board, Lord of mercy, all this money gone for nothing? Anyway, I'm waiting for the full disclosure, and yes, sir, I'm also waiting on the inquiry.
Let me make the point here that this forensic audit that we're having into the airport project is not a witch hunt. Based on the excesses that we would have seen, haven't gotten full information, haven't got the documentation. Admittedly, it is not something that we had paid any attention to, even though we knew in opposition that it was overpriced, that it was a rip-off. But you see, now that the information has come to us and they want to make the issue of corruption a topical issue, but let's go. Because they're not going to get away scot-free with this. And Harold Lovell has to answer. I find it strange enough that he's also making the case that what he doesn't quite remember. Well, guess what? We have put some information out in the public domain now. Come and speak to it. I know that if anybody were to provide any contract and to ask me anything about it, I can say definitively not this man here. Because I knew that nobody ever come to me with any brown paper bag and asked me to do anything. By the time I recognize there's any quid pro quo in any discussion, any relationship, that's where it starts and that's where it ends. I don't mess around. You know why? Because I am very liberal with my mouth. And y'all are going to shame me. I must be able to stand up in any forum and speak. I would not want to be in a position that either me or any of my minister that when we travel, that people holding us in suspicion and treating us with contempt. You can imagine if the UPP were to win and a particular minister went and represent us as a minister of national security. He's laughing and laugh at him. We're sure look up at him and say, pow, pow.
Leave it there before.
I'm going to make a joke, man.
Anyway, leave it there. This is what Harold Lovell... Yeah.
I call him pow, pow.
I heard you, sir. This is what Harold Lovell had to say pertaining to the issue. I just wanted the listeners to get a gist of what he said when he was asked about whether or not he's concerned about the Andrade Gutierrez loan of $94 million. He said, it will come to naught. It will come to nothing. Give a listen.
Right thing by the people, and that means following the law and making sure that where there has been wrongdoing, there will have to be consequences.
Are you concerned about this probe that has been recently announced with respect to this one-way extension, this $94 million loan? You did indicate, I think, in public statements that you're unperturbed. Why would you not be concerned about something like that?
Well, because personally, I didn't borrow any money. I was Minister of Finance. We guaranteed a loan that was given to the Antigua and Barbuda Airport Authority. They've been there for 7 years. Sir Robin, he has had an opportunity to look at the books. The person who is now the CEO was the Accountant General. If there's any wrongdoing, it would have already come to the fore. How is it that 7 years later, they all of a sudden now are talking about a probe? It's really just an effort to, again, try to get at me as the leader of the opposition party. But it will come to naught because they won't find any wrongdoing on my part in terms of the loan that was given at the time.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Mr. Prime Minister, we have to open up the lines. I am not...
You recall that we provided the evidence in which Andre Gutierrez was literally convicted in a U.S. court and had to pay a fine of $382 million.
Yes.
You have the information, pull it up again and post it so those who are on Facebook can see the evidence. And so they were convicted for graft, corruption, bribes. So we know that company had a history of bribing public officials to get contracts. And we also know, too, that company has had a history of inflating contracts. In fact, one of the noted contracts in which they inflated the cost was one in Brazil in which they inflated a particular contract by $2 billion as a result of the cost overruns. So the question will be asked here, what is the probability that a company that had a history of corruption that was contracted by our then government, what is the probability of no graft being paid? What is the probability of no corruption? So again, Harold is involved from the standpoint that he was the minister under which the project started. He witnessed the document, the contract document. Subsequently, he became Minister of Finance, and he signed off on the financial agreement to pay them. Now, we never accuse him to say that, it is personal money. I don't know smartness he's trying. If he's smart, that he can just go there and just obfuscate the issue and to, divert attention. What we're saying here, you're the minister, and it's on that basis that we're asking you to account. And if you don't account now, you will have to account at the multi-purpose center because we're putting you on the stand.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Prime Minister, just a suggestion here from one of our WhatsAppers. The person says here, Antigua Barbuda Labour Party needs an online presence to share all this information. Someone informative, bold, and not thin-skinned. Mr. Harris is not enough in this regard. He does not appeal to the younger voters. You want to respond to that, sir?
I think they have a point, because you see, by Harold Lovell just going on the radio and dismissing it and say it's going to come to nothing, those who support him will not understand the seriousness of this issue. This is not a frivolous issue. This is a project in which we expanded our airport by 1,000 linear feet and resurfaced it, put in new lighting, and we had to pay probably $60-something million. Because they also assume some loans that existed before. It is definitely a form of extortion of public resources that occurred under the UPP administration, of which Harold Lovell was a senior member. I have given a comparison in which we are constructing a 6,100 linear feet airport on Barbuda, and that will cost us no more than about $20 million US. So how come and we have to put in lighting and so on, how come 1,000 linear feet and the resurfacing of our airport could cost 60-something million US?
Quite
Impossible.
exorbitant. Quite exorbitant.
We got a rotten deal, and the kind of monies that are involved. When you look at the preliminary report that was done, in which even a payment of 19 million US that was not included in the arbitration ended up as part of the settlement. We must overlook that. You're not talking about 19 million yen, or 19 million RMBs, 19 million US dollars we're talking about here, just for that one lump sum of money that was added to the arbitration costs of 35 or $36 million. This can't go unchecked. This can't go unaccounted for. And Harold Lovell and co, they have to account.
All right. We're going to open the lines now, sir, and we'll get the reaction of the listeners and viewers. We're so pleased that we have created these platforms so that you can join us. And for those of you wishing to join us